Just run away?
2023. Phantom Blade Zero looked like this.
That no one could escape.
Now fast forward to 2026. This is what it looks like today. Years ago, S-Game graced the gaming community with its Phantom Blade Zero with its first ever reveal, showcasing a deep and dark art style, fast-paced combat, immersive animations, and an unreal game design blending Chinese martial arts with steampunk. And honestly, that alone was enough to gather massive attention. But between that first reveal in 2023 and what S-Game is showing us today, there's been a massive leap across almost every aspect of the game. From its visuals, to its combat and weaponry, to the way its progression and gameplay systems are being built around mastery. And underneath all that spectacle, S-Game has revealed systems that have completely changed how I look at this game. So after watching Phantom Blade Zero evolve from that first reveal all the way to the latest 11-minute showcase and dedicated state of play, here are 3 of the biggest ways Phantom Blade Zero is not the same game we saw in 2023. Phantom Blade Zero went from an impressive reveal to a much more refined world, with major improvements across its visuals and presentation. When the game was first revealed in 2023, it already looked impressive. The character designs were striking, the combat compelling, and the environments had that distinct wuxia-inspired atmosphere. But compare that footage to what we're seeing now. The difference is quite noticeable. First, the character models have become much more refined. You can see more detail in the characters themselves, especially when you look at the bosses and how much more expressive and polished their designs now appear during combat. In addition, there's the animation quality. There's noticeably more detail in how characters transition between attacks, their movement and reaction time. Combining that with the combat animations gives the fight that sense of a well-planned choreography. Though I really have to wonder how S-Game is going to maintain a consistent 60 frames per second with a game moving at this pace, because when the combat is this fast, the transitions between animations have to remain smooth and responsive. That's one of the most important parts of keeping the combat immersive. And the camera work has also come a long way. In many of these newer sequences, the camera keeps enough of the action visible for you to understand what's happening, even when Soul is dealing with multiple threats at once. And one of my favorite examples of this evolution is actually the horse chase sequence. So take a look at this. We're not comparing 2 completely unrelated scenes here. S-Game has revisited the same idea, but the newer version feels much more alive and fluid. The environment has more detail, and the camera does a satisfactory job of keeping the action readable while the chase is happening. And I particularly like how the improvement extends beyond the characters. The finisher animations feels more brutal, and the visual effects working together to add depth to the scenes. And this isn't just something I have assumed from watching the trailers. Soulframe, the founder and creative director of S-Game, has talked about the major reworks and refinements made to the game's characters and environments throughout development. So when you put the 2023 footage next to what we're seeing in 2026, I believe the game has seen better days going through those transitions and minor development touches over these past years, and for me that's one of the clearest signs of how much Phantom Blade Zero has evolved since that first reveal in 2023. One of the craziest reveals about Phantom Blade Zero's weaponry, from its earliest reveal to the combat system we're seeing today, is simply how much of an arsenal Soul is going to have. 55 weapons, that's 30 primary weapons, and 25 secondary weapons, known as Phantom Edges. And here's where it gets even crazy. These aren't simply 55 cosmetic variations. Every single one has its own unique abilities, and each weapon comes with its own skill tree progression. Now picture this, in the God of War Norse games, particularly Ragnarok, we have 3 primary weapons: the Draupnir Spear, Blades of Chaos and Leviathan Axe, with dedicated skill trees for each. And when you consider how many different skills each weapon has, you already understand the amount of mastery required to keep up with those weapons during active combat. Now imagine taking that same concept and applying it to 55 weapons with their own unique abilities and skill progression. That's a whole new level of crazy, which means Phantom Blade Zero isn't simply giving you a huge collection of weapons. It's potentially giving you dozens of different mastery paths and a learning curve like a mini journal. And it gets even more interesting when you look at how these weapons are actually acquired. We've seen powerful enemies and bosses reward the player with new techniques, weapons, and other useful abilities after they're defeated. So a boss isn't necessarily just standing between you and the next part of the story. It can potentially reward you with a weapon that becomes useful for what comes next. But normally, a system this large can create one very annoying problem: choice fatigue. When you're presented with 55 weapons, each with their own abilities and skill trees, deciding what to use can become overwhelming. But as I mentioned earlier, these weapons were designed to be more suited to certain combat problems, while still having an overall purpose in combat. And because you can recall your skill points, you're not necessarily stuck with a weapon simply because you've invested heavily into it. And that's actually important, because it means experimenting with the arsenal doesn't have to feel like a permanent mistake. You can try something, master it, change your mind, and try something else. Though I am tempted to feel that this is also S-Game's way of wanting to keep you in the game for much longer. Because how do you master 55 weapons and not want to keep coming back? And that brings us to what I think is an even bigger change. Because all of these weapons aren't changing the way Phantom Blade Zero expects you to approach every combat encounter.
What? What have I done?
When Phantom Blade Zero was first revealed, the reaction was probably, well, let's just see how this all goes. Because at that point, there weren't so much to nail or understand the loop connecting everything together. And most importantly, we didn't know how S-Game was actually going to turn the whole 66 days concept into gameplay. But with each new reveal, especially with the State of Play showcase, that picture became considerably clearer. When you explore certain locations, you encounter powerful opponents, defeat them, and potentially gain new techniques, weapons, and other useful rewards. And what you discover can directly expand how you fight. But what's even more interesting is that some encounters appear capable of affecting what happens as you progress. The Red Wraith is a great example. In one of the demonstrations, particularly the 2025's S-Party gameplay demo, the player encounters Red Wraith but doesn't defeat it before moving on. Later, during the Chief Disciple of the Seven Stars encounter, that earlier decision comes back to haunt the player, because Red Wraith shows up and makes the fight even more difficult. It's an encounter becoming a consequence of your decision, and this is where Phantom Blade Zero's combat starts becoming even more interesting. In the Hellwalker difficulty, bosses aren't simply there for you to memorize and eventually beat by repeating the same pattern. The game's design makes bosses recognize your patterns and reacting to how you approach them. So if you keep attacking them the same way, you're only making your own combat behavior part of the challenge and can be punished. And that creates a very different kind of mastery, because in a lot of action games, the process usually looks something like this. Learn the enemy's pattern, recognize the opening, repeat until you've mastered the fight, but Phantom Blade Zero appears to be turning part of that equation around. The enemy is somewhat adaptive, which means you have to make your own approach less predictable. And when you start doing that, the combat opens up. That's crazy to me, because now mastery isn't just about knowing what the enemy is going to do. It's also about knowing what you can do. And then S-Game finally answered one of the biggest questions I've had about Phantom Blade Zero since the 66 days concept was introduced. Soul's story gives him just 66 days to live after his temporary cure, and S-Game has now turned that narrative premise into a dedicated challenge mode.
Unlike the other difficulty settings, this mode turns Soul's 66-day countdown into a literal gameplay timeline.
Every time you die, you lose one. So if you can maintain a no-death run, there's currently no indication that the counter simply ticks down because you're exploring, fighting, or taking your time. That's absolutely brutal. And all that to me is perhaps some of the biggest evolution Phantom Blade Zero has gone through since 2023. And when I look back from 2023 to what S-Game is showing us today, I don't just see a game that got better, I see a game that became far more ambitious. And honestly, that's probably what excites me the most. And on October 29th, we'll finally find out just how far this evolution has gone while taking charge of the controller. Until then, there's still a lot more to unpack, so feel free to subscribe, like the video, and get ready to enter the destruction of the Wulin. Bye for now.